Okay, hi everyone, welcome to this live stream for Windows Server 2003. So I just want to share my screen. Okay, Administration Security Policy, Chapter 3, Microsoft Exam Objectives covered in this chapter. Implement secure network administration procedures, implement security baseline settings and audit security settings by using security templates, implement the principle of least privilege, install and configure software update infrastructure, install and configure software update services, install and configure automatic client update settings, configure software updates on earlier operating systems, troubleshoot server services, diagnose and resolve issues related to service dependency, use service recovery options to diagnose and resolve service-related issues. So, like its predecessor, Windows 2000 Server, Windows Server 2003 enables you to administer security at a granular level to control a variety of options for user rights as well as the behavior of applications and the operating system itself. This is accomplished through the use of security policies at the local or domain level. Security groupings can be applied at the site, domain, or OU or local level and are configured through group policy. Account policies are used to control the logon process, such as password and account lockout configurations. Local policies are used to define security policies for the computer, such as auditing, user rights, and security options. The Security and Configuration and Analysis tool is a Windows Server 2003 utility that you can use to analyze your security configuration using any of a set of standardized security templates. This utility compares your actual security configuration to your desired configuration. In this chapter, you'll learn about these different security types and tools, as well as how to manage security in a Windows Server 2003 environment using group policy and local security policies, and how to use the security analysis and configuration utility. In addition, you will learn about the software update tools included with Windows Server 2003. Windows is an ever-changing operating system that requires occasional updates to run properly. The most important updates are the security updates that Microsoft releases whenever vulnerabilities are found in any of its products. Microsoft always makes sure to fix these leaks as soon as possible, usually within 24 hours of their discovery. In order to protect your system, you need to make sure that you apply updates as soon as they become available. The update tools included with Windows Server 2003 provide you with a way to do this. Finally, we will look at Windows Server 2003 services. Services range from the print spooler service to the DNS service and provide a great variety of functionality to the operating system. You will learn how to use services utility to start, stop, and examine the services that are enabled on your server. An overview of user and group accounts. If you haven't already passed the 17920 exam, managing and maintaining a Microsoft Windows Server 2003 environment, then you might benefit from a quick overview of how user and group accounts operate in the Windows Server 2003 environment. In this section, we'll cover both local and domain accounts, but note that the 70291 exam focuses primarily on domain accounts. User accounts, a computer account that is running XP Professional or Windows Server 2003 configured as a member server, has the capability to store its own user accounts database. The users that are stored at the local computer are known as local accounts. Active Directory is a directory service that is available with the Windows 2000 Server and Server 2003 platforms. It stores information in a central database that allows users to have a single user account for access to resources across the enterprise network. The users and groups that are stored in Active Directory's central database are called Active Directory users or domain users. So when you install Windows Server 2003, there are several built-in user accounts that are created. By default, the following accounts are the two most important accounts that are created. The administrator account, which is a special account that has full control over the computer. You provide password for this account during Windows Server 2003 installation. The administrator account can perform all tasks such as creating users and groups, managing the file system, and setting up printing. The guest account, which allows users to access the computer even if they do not have a unique username and password. Because of the inherent security risks associated with this type of user, this account is disabled by default. When this account is enabled, it is given very limited privileges. Microsoft recommends, so I don't need to read that. So group accounts. On a Windows Server 2003 member server, you can use only local groups. A local group resides on a Windows Server 2003 member server's local database. On a Windows Server 2003 domain controller in Active Directory, you can have security groups and distribution groups. A security group is a logical group of users who need to access specific resources. You use security groups to assign permissions to resources. A distribution group is a logical group of users who have common characteristics. Distribution groups can be used by applications and email programs, for example, Microsoft Exchange. Distribution groups contain no access control lists, ACLs, and therefore have no permissions. This allows these groups to execute at very high speed. Windows Server 2003 domain controllers also allow you to select group scope, which can be domain, local, global, or universal. The scope types are used as follows. Domain local groups are used to assign permissions to resources. Local groups can contain user accounts, universal groups, and global groups from any domain in the tree or forest. A domain local group can also contain other domain local groups from its own local domain. Global groups are used to organize users who have similar network access requirements. Global groups can contain users and global groups for the local domain. Universal groups are used to logically organize global groups, and they appear in the global catalog, a special listing that contains limited information about every object in Active Directory. Universal groups can contain users not recommended from anywhere in the domain, tree, or forest, other universal groups, and global catalog groups. On Windows XP professional computers and Windows Server 2003 member servers, you create and manage local groups through local users and groups utility. On Windows Server 2003 domain controllers, you manage groups with Microsoft Active Directory users and computers ADUC utility. Security policy types and tools. Windows Server 2003 enables you to manage security settings at either the local computer level or the site, domain, and OU level. Domain security policies override local policies. You can manage policies with group policy and the appropriate object. To manage local policies, you use group policy with the local computer group policy objects, GPOs. To manage domain policies, you use group policy with the Active Directory domain controllers, GPOs. We will begin by discussing Active Directory group policies and see how GPOs apply at different levels within the directory. Then we will look at group policies at the local computer level. Group policies within Active Directory. If Windows Server 2003 is installed with Active Directory, group policies can be applied as group policy objects, GPOs. Group policies contain configuration settings for the following options. Software. Software policies are used to configure system services, the appearance of the desktop and application settings. Scripts. Scripts are special instructions that can be configured to run when the user logs on or off the computer or when the computer is started or shut down. Security. Security policies define how security is configured and applied at the local computer or through Active Directory. Application and file deployment. Application and file deployment policies are used to assign and publish applications or to place files in the user's desktop within a specific folder, for example, the Start menu folder or within favorites. Quick overview of Active Directory. Within Active Directory, you have several levels of hierarchical structure. A typical structure will consist of domains, organizational units, OUs, and sites. Other levels exist within Active Directory, but this section focuses on domains, organizational units, and sites in the context of using GPUs. Domains. The domain is the main object of organization within Active Directory. Within a domain, there are many domain objects, including users, groups, and GPUs. Security can be applied to each domain object to specify who can access the object and the level of access they have. The Active Directory data for each domain is stored on one or more Windows 2000 server or Windows Server 2003 computers specifically configured as domain controllers. If you use multiple domain controllers for redundancy or for multiple physical locations, then you must replicate the Active Directory data between them on a regular basis in order to maintain a consistent database. Determining the domain functional level. Windows Server 2003 Active Directory introduces a new concept called domain and forest functionality. This is similar to the idea of mixed mode and native mode in Windows 2000 Server Active Directory. So much so that these two modes are actually included as part of domain and forest functionality. However, Microsoft refers to these modes as functional levels and adds a third functional level appropriately called Windows Server 2003 functional level. When you are installing a Windows Server 2003 domain controller, you must determine which functional level you will support: Windows 2000 Mixed, Windows 2000 Native, or Windows Server 2003. Windows 2000 Mixed domain function level is a default option when you are installing a domain controller. It is designed to allow backward compatibility with Windows NT 4 and earlier domain models. If you need to support Windows NT domain controllers for one or more domains within your environment, you should choose Windows 2000 Mixed domain functional level for those domains. However, as long as you are using Windows 2000 Mixed domain functional level, certain Active Directory features such as universal groups and group nesting are unavailable. If your environment does not require support for Windows NT domain controllers within any of your domains, but does require support for Windows 2000 domain controllers, then you can choose to implement your domains in Windows 2000 Native Domain Functional Level. Windows 2000 Native Domain Functional Level allows for the most of the functionality of the Active Directory of all domain controllers, but it does not allow for backward compatibility with Windows NT 4. Since this means that Windows NT domain controllers cannot be used in Windows 2000 Native Domain Functional Level Active Directory domains, it's an important decision. Note also that domains cannot be converted from Windows 2000 Native Domain Functional Level back to Windows 2000 Mixed Domain Functional Level. Windows 2000 Native Domain Functional Level does not offer the full functionality of Active Directory supported by Windows Server 2003, so you should consider upgrading all of your domain controllers if you want to use some of the new features of Active Directory. If you Note that you will only be running Windows Server 2003 domain controllers. You can install Active Directory in the Windows Server 2003 domain functional level. This level adds all of the functionality of Active Directory shown in Table 3.1. So I'll just go through these here. Domain function level feature, Windows 2000 mixed, Windows 2000 native, Windows Server 2003. So ability to rename domain controllers disabled, enabled. Logon timestamp updates disabled, enabled. Kerberos KDC key version numbers disabled, enabled. Int org person objects can have passwords disabled, enabled. Converts entity groups to domain, local, and global groups disabled, enabled. SID history disabled, enabled. Group nesting enabled for distribution groups, disabled for security groups. Note that domain local security groups can still have global groups as members, enabled. Universal groups enabled for distribution groups, disabled for security groups, enabled. In addition to domain functional levels, Windows Server 2003 includes added forest functionality over Windows 2000. The forest functionality applies to all of the domains in a forest. There are two levels of forest functionality, Windows 2000 and Windows Server 2003. Windows 2000 forest functionality is the default and supports Windows NT4. Windows 2000 and Windows Server 2003 domain controllers. All of the new forest functionality features of Windows Server 2003 are supported exclusively by Windows Server 2003. The new features include global catalog replication enhancements. When an administrator adds a new attribute to the global catalog, only the changes are replicated to other global catalogs in the forest. This can significantly reduce the amount of network traffic generated by replication. Defunct schema classes and attributes. You can never permanently remove classes and attributes from the Active Directory schema, but you can mark them as defunct so that they cannot be used. When forest functionality is raised to Windows Server 2003, you can redefine the defunct schema attribute so that it occupies a new role in the schema. Forest trusts. Previously, system administrators had no easy way of granting permission on resource in different forests. Windows Server 2003 resolves some of these difficulties by allowing trust relationships between separate Active Directory forests. Forest trusts are much like domain trusts, except that they extend to every domain in two forests. Note that all forest trusts are intransitive. Linked value replication. Windows Server 2003 introduces a new concept called linked value replication. In Windows 2000, if changes were made to a member of a group, the entire group would be replicated during the replication process. With linked value replication, only the user record that has been changed is replicated. This can significantly reduce network traffic associated with replication. Renaming domains. Although the Active Directory domain structure was originally designed to be flexible, there were several limitations due to mergers, acquisitions, corporate reorganizations, and other business changes. You may need to rename domains. You can now change the DNS and NetBIOS names for any domain, as well as reposition a domain within a forest. Note that this operation is not nearly as simple as just issuing a rename command. Instead, there's a specific process you must follow to make sure that the operation is successful. Fortunately, when you properly follow the procedure, Microsoft supports domain renaming other features. In addition to the Windows Server 2003 forest functional features just listed, Windows Server 2003 also supports improved replication algorithms and dynamic auxiliary classes. These improvements are designed to increase performance, scalability, and reliability. Organizational units. Within a domain, you can further subdivide and organize domain objects through the use of organizational units, OUs. This is one of the key differences between Windows NT domains and Windows 2000 and 2003 domains. The NT domains were not able to store information hierarchically. Windows 2003 domains, through the use of OUs, allow you to store objects hierarchically, typically based on function or geography. For example, assume that your company is called ABC Corp. You have locations in New York, San Jose, and Belfast. You might create a domain called abccorp.com and OUs called NYSJ and Belfast. In a very large corporation, you might also organize the OUs based on function. For example, the domain could be abccorp.com and the OUs might be sales. I think ACC there's accounting and tech support. Tech SUPP. Based on the size and security needs of your organization, you might also have OUs nested within OUs. OUs that contain other OUs are called parents, and the OUs that are contained within parent OUs are called children. The relationships between nested OUs are called parent-child relationships. As a general rule, you will want to keep your Active Directory structure as simple as possible. Sites. Domains and OUs can be thought of as logical groupings of network resources. In the preceding example, you saw that it might make sense to organize OUs by location or by department, according to your preference or the needs of the network. In contrast, sites organize the Active Directory into distinct physical locations. Sites are primarily used for directory replication purposes. Consider what happens when you have two physical separate locations that share a common directory. Without frequent replication, the two directories would become horribly disjointed and practically useless. However, if you set up sites in the directory for each location, you can schedule replication to occur at regular intervals and maintain a consistent database. Delegation of administrative control. OUs are the smallest component within a domain to which permissions and group policy can be assigned. Let's look specifically at how administrative control is set on OUs. The idea of delegation involves a higher security authority that can give permissions to another. As a real-world example, assume that you are the director of IT for a large organization. Instead of doing all the work yourself, you would probably assign roles and responsibilities to other individuals. For example, you might make one system administrator responsible for all operations within the sales domain and another responsible for the engineering domain. Similarly, you could assign the permissions for managing all printers and print queues within the organization to one individual, while allowing another to manage all security permissions for groups, for users and groups. In this way, the various roles and responsibilities of the IT staff can be distributed throughout the organization. Business generally have a division of labor to handle all the tasks involved in keeping the company's network humming along. Network operating systems, however, often make it difficult to assign just the right permissions. Sometimes the complexity is necessary to ensure that only the right permissions are assigned. A good general rule of thumb is to provide users and administrators with the minimum permissions they require to do their jobs. This ensures that accidental, malicious, and otherwise unwanted changes do not occur. In the world of Active Directory, the process of delegation is used to define the permissions for administrators of OUs. When considering implementing delegation, there are two main concerns to keep in mind: parent-child relationships and inherent settings. parent-child relationships. The OU hierarchy you create will be very important when considering the maintainability of security permissions. As we've already mentioned, OUs can exist in a parent-child relationship. When it comes to the delegation of permissions, this is extremely important. You can choose to allow child containers to automatically inherit the permissions set on parent containers. For example, if the North America division of your organization contains 12 OUs, you could delegate permissions to all of them by placing security permissions on the North America division. This feature can greatly ease administration, especially in larger organizations, but is also a reminder of the importance of properly planning the OU structure within a domain. Okay. Potential problem. Inexperienced users might inadvertently change settings, causing problems that can require many hours of fix. In many cases, and especially in business environments, users will require only a subset of the complete functionality provided by the operating system. In the past, however, the difficulty associated with implementing and managing security and policy settings has led to lax security policies. Some of the reasons for this are technical. It can be very tedious and difficult to implement and manage security restrictions. Other problems have been political. Users and management might feel they should have full permissions on their local machines, despite the potential problems this might cause. One of the major design goals for the Windows Server 2003 platform, and especially Active Directory, was manageability. Although the broad range in features and functionality provided by the operating system can be helpful, being able to lock down types of functionality is very important. That's where the idea of group policies comes in. Simply defined, group policies are collections of permissions that can be applied to objects within Active Directory. Specifically, group policy settings are assigned at the site, domain, and OU level and can apply to user accounts, computer accounts, and groups. Examples of settings that an administrator can make using group policies include the following: restricting access to the start menu, disallowing the use of control panel, limited choices for display and desktop settings. So I'm going to leave it here today for this live stream. If you like listening, please consider like, sharing, and thank you.